Good evening and welcome very much to Conversations, where I'm pleased to welcome to the program this evening Yanni Damiano. And Yanni is a Palestinian born in 1948, the year of the establishment of the state of, or the enunciation of the state of Israel. He was born there and raised in that part of the world, or in what is Israel, Palestine, from the time he was born, and he's an independent filmmaker. And Yanni, welcome very, very much to Conversations.
Thank you, Harold, for having me on your program.
Not at all. It's a great pleasure. It's sort of interesting that you would have been born in that year here in the United States, where we have, on the whole, a certain view of the events of 1947, 1948, the events that followed, the War of 1967 and so forth. You are a Palestinian. Your family were some of those Palestinians who remained in Israel.
Correct.
In 1948. I wonder if maybe we could begin at the beginning, as it were, in a certain sense, of 1948. The view that many people in the United States and many of the Israeli people have is that the Jewish people who were establishing the State of Israel were in a disadvantageous position relative to the forces that there were among the Palestinian and even the Arab peoples around them. I wonder if maybe you could share with us what the military and the realities were from your perspective in terms of this eventful time, 1948, the birth of this state of Israel. What were some of the realities, political, military, demographic, and so forth, of that 1948 scene that you were born into?
Well, I think there is a great misconception, really, or maybe intentional misconception here in the West. But for us, the Palestinians, as well as the Israelis, we know the facts. They know the facts, really. Without going really into details of those years, it is clear today to those who wants to read that the Jewish settlement in Palestine in 1948 was able to put more guns, more ammunition, more soldiers into the battle for their so-called independence, more than the Palestinians. Of course, not the Palestinians. The Palestinians were almost eliminated as a factor as a result of all kind of reasons, really, that we could come to them if you wish, but more soldiers than all the Arabs together. Egypt, Syria, Iraq, Jordan together. They were able to put some 56,000 soldiers ready to fight, while the Arabs, all the Arabs together, were unable to put that number of soldiers. At the same time, we really have to understand the reality then. The Arab world in the 40s up to the late 40s really was under direct colonial control, French as well as Britain. So to suggest that there was an Arab real fight, it is incorrect, really. There were orders that coming from Britain, from London, and that's what really could explain the inefficiency and the lack of real struggle on that issue, really. But Israel, or the Jewish settlement in Palestine, was able to put more soldiers into the battle than all the Arabs together. There are more to that, really, than what the eye could see. It is fact that basically most of the Palestinians became refugees as a result of that war. Actually, now we know that the Palestinians start becoming refugees even before the start of the hostilities. Some people suggest basically that the war was the result of the mass exodus of the Palestinians, not the instigator of that exodus, really. 300,000 Palestinians left their homes prior to the outbreak of hostilities.
Yeah, well, Israeli peoples have tried to say, in a certain sense, that they're a besieged person by a great Arab mass of people and armed forces that they have to fight against, and that they had, a certain sense, an underdog position, as it were, as far as their role in that part of the world. You're familiar.
That is not correct, really, anymore. I mean, Jewish historians, Israeli historians today, willing to admit that is not correct. Simcha Flapan, in his book, a new book from 2-3 years ago, The Birth of Israel, really actually details a little bit more honest account of those events. Benny Morris wrote a book in English, also speaks specifically of the event in 1948, actually, from these books, you could find that really what we perceive until now as the view or the historic account of what has happened then really is being challenged, even by Jewish really scholars or Israeli scholars.
Yeah.
I mean, you could take it today. I mean, this argument is being used even today, that it is a little state that is besieged by a massive Arab world, really, that is intent on the extermination or the elimination of the state of Israel. We know the facts really are different, really. We know that Israel won all the wars, really, against the Arabs, and in the process, they were able, actually, not only...
Yeah, they're usually trying to say, in a certain sense, certainly in 67 and so forth, they're saying that they were attacked and they were defending themselves, and their position is that they must defend themselves against this intransigent Arab, massive Arab force that is trying to eliminate them as a force, and that it's the security interest is the standard position that the Israeli forces and political leadership takes.
Well, from an Israeli point of view, they really have to see that to justify their constant expansion into the land, into the Palestinian land. And if you look at really the chronicle of expansionist policies of the state of Israel, really, they continue to expand. From 1948, they took more than what the United Nations were allocating to them, really, 14,000 square kilometers. They got 20,000 part of actually what was supposed to be the Palestinian state. In 1949, they expanded into the Egyptian territory, and they took basically what is known today Eilat, the southern tip of Israel, really. The seaport of Eilat basically was an Egyptian territory which was conquered by Israel, really, after the cessation of fighting in 1948. In 1956, another war, really, which the result of that war, that Israel took Gaza Strip and other part of Sinai, really, without an American pressure at the time. Israel would have stayed then, really. It took at 6/7. 6/7 is another great myth where Israel really tried to sell to the world that basically they were besieged and it is a preventive war. And we know for a fact, if you read Hebrew and you look at the Hebrew accounts of that war, actually, many generals in the Israeli army, as well as politicians, right after the war, start talking of that thing where they suggested basically it wasn't really a war that we did not want. It was a war that they didn't want. They did want, really, and they were able actually to trap the Egyptian politician Jamal Abdel Nasser at the time, as well as the Egyptian army. And it is a war that they designed. It is a war that they were able to manufacture under various pretexts, and they got it. And the result of that war, we know that Israel took all Sinai, as well as the West Bank, Gaza Strip, and the Golan Heights. And Israel is still really occupying force in most of these territories that were conquered.
Despite UN resolutions that call it into question.
Well, despite...
It brings classically the double standard argument that so many of the Arab people are saying as it relates to, in the immediate sense, to the Kuwait. They were ready to implement UN resolutions immediately, but when it came to Palestine or other questions, they just have ignored those in the view of the Palestinians.
Well, that is correct, really. We know that the Arabs, all the Arabs, including the Palestinians, the PLO, had accepted United Nations resolutions, UN Security Council resolution 242338, which will be the basis for future negotiation to settle the conflict between Israel and Palestine, really. We know that the Mr. Shamir government did refuse until now to recognize these two resolutions, while all the Arabs, including the Iraqi government, really, as well as the PLO, Egypt, Syria, Jordan, accepted those resolutions as the basis for negotiation with Israel. Israel refused to accept them, really. And actually, I read in the Hebrew press last week where the American government had asked the Shamir government to explicitly say what they think of these two resolutions. To double standards, yes, we have double standard now. We had double standard then. We had double standard in the 30s. We have double standards in the teens. Actually, the West in general, and the West in particular, really, in 1917, when they decided that it is important for their interest in the Middle East to help establish a homeland for the Jews in Palestine, and they gave their declaration, Balfour Declaration. We know that took place in 1917 when they promised the Jewish World Organization that they will help and be involved directly in establishing Jewish homeland in Palestine. We know at that year they delegitimized Palestinian nationalism, really, and gave that legitimacy to the Jewish the Zionist organization, really. In my view, nothing has happened since then. The Western civilization, the Western political system, really, created the State of Israel, and they are still unwilling, actually, to take responsibility for the victims of basically what were their victims, which were the Jews of Europe at the time, really. In my view, nothing has changed in principle in that general view of
yeah,
things.
it is interesting that there was a caveat to that Balfour Declaration that looked with favor upon the establishment of a Jewish homeland in Palestine. That was that it would in no way work against the Arab peoples who were the indigenous peoples there, which ran a little bit against your experience, your family's experience. And we want to come back a little bit, too, to the fact that there might be some people who don't realize that as we came out of the Second World War, the tremendous suffering of the European Jewry then, the movement of the Zionist, some settlement, some buying of land in the State of Israel, moving toward the establishment of a State of Israel under colonial power, the British colonial power that had the British, the mandate in Palestine, that they finally, in a certain sense, under the difficulties of trying to administer, had handed it over to the United Nations. The United Nations had made a decision to partition Israel into roughly, or what is to become Israel, Palestine, into two states, an Arab and an Israel, as it were. And that was not accepted by the Arab peoples, that notion. Right?
Yeah.
The Jewish people did accept it. They then, in the War of 1948, took not only that 50% that was supposed to be the Jewish state, but a good deal more under what you say was an overwhelming advantage of force of arms that they had at that time. Is that more or less correct as you see it?
There are some, actually, even in your attempt really to have the correct facts, really, there is basically still some lack of accuracy in this display. Balfour Declaration did not acknowledge Palestinian political rights. They said not to prejudice civil rights, not political rights. Actually, it was clear, basically, that Balfour Declaration meant not to make or to help the Palestinians achieve a national homeland of their own, really, while help the Zionist movement achieve a political national home, really. So that's really its important fact. Even the Labour Party in 1944, actually, during their annual conference, they spoke explicitly that we should find a ways to speed, actually, the expulsion of Palestinians from Palestine and speed the entry of Jews into Palestine. I mean, to them, that was not only a position, that was basically any colonial and imperial position, anticipating that there will be backlash by the indigenous population in the Arab world, including the Palestinians, to fight against colonialism. They wanted to create, basically, and they talked about it, an ally in the heart of the Arab world, really, that would see its interest to fight along the British against the ties of anti-colonialism. So this is really a very important fact. The other thing, it's true, in 1948-47, the United Nations decided to partition Palestine, but remember, in 1948, the Third World was mostly under direct or indirect colonial rule. The British, the Americans were able really to influence the outcome of the United Nations, as they were able to influence really the outcome that took place recently with respect to Iraq-Kuwait question, really. So to suggest that the United Nations was free to let these voices express themselves freely, that's also incorrect. But nevertheless, there was something strange, really, in the partition plan. The Jews, even as a result of the mass exodus from Europe into Palestine, really, especially after the destruction of the Jewish culture and Jewish being in Europe, really, by 1948, there were only 600,000 in Palestine, really, jumping from 83,000, which their number was in 1920-21, jumping from actually 11,000, which was in 1840, to 600,000. And the partition plan, very strangely, gave them 56% of the land of Palestine when they weren't the majority. Not only that, the area that was allocated to the Jewish state actually did not have a Jewish majority. So, I mean, it was a plan really that did not mean to work, was not intended to work, really. If they really wanted to implement the partition plan, they could have implemented, they could have prevented Israel from getting more than what that plan allocated for them, really. And they got it. And that's really when the refugee problem the Palestinians were forced at gunpoint, basically, and this is very important to emphasize, at gunpoint, really, into exodus, into the neighboring countries, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, and so on, and so on. And you have plenty of Hebrew facts, Jewish facts, Israeli facts that could support this.
Well, of course, they will say, many of those people say, well, they left with the idea that they were going to join an Arab force that would come back and wipe Israel out. They left of their own volition. They weren't forced out. And this is a position, more or less, that they would take, because they've tried to take the position they're not expansionists, that they are the ones who were put upon, as it were, not the expansionist force there. And you, of course, take exception to that.
That's
as
not
a Palestinian.
Even if we focus really on the dynamics of, on the politics of Israel, we see that. Look at the West Bank today, really. They took the West Bank, they conquered the West Bank in 1967. Now, they were able really to seize 50%, 56, 57, up to 60% of the land in the West Bank. I mean, we know that there is a pattern of constant really attempt to pull the rug from underneath the Palestinians. There are Hebrew facts actually attest to these atrocities that were taking place in 1948, which resulted really in the mass exoduses. We have Deir Yassin, we have which
Deir Yassin was a
Deir Yassin. You have other accounts.
Was a massacre that took place in what, 48, I guess, right?
It took place in 1948, where 250 peasants, women, children, men were massacred.
Was that Stern Gang or Begin or was it Shamir? Or,
yes,
that took credit for that.
Yes,
and they had also been Jabotinsky followers that had been hardline, had been attempting to take a hardline view against the British colonial forces that had been there too, the King David Hotel and so forth that they had bombed, and there had been a very radical hardline group as opposed to, I don't know, a more humanitarian kind of Zionist group, as it were, between the peoples that are there within Israel. There's hardliners and there's people who are not so hardline. Huh?
Yes and no, Harold. It is fact, really. All the Zionist elements that participated really in establishing the State of Israel to suggest that they had a humanist element among them really is wrong. There are humanist elements, but those never were part of, again, the accomplishment, part of the build-up of Jewish
Martin Buber.
Yes, but those did not play. Those were critical of the Zionist project, actually.
Yeah, once it became political hardline, they really moved away from that.
But we did not have any second thought among really the various political forces that took on their responsibility actually to establish the Jewish state, no matter what the expense will be. I mean, we know the city of Ramli, Lod, Jaffa, they were evicted at gunpoint, basically. They were evicted there. The Israeli army brought trucks to these towns and basically forced people to ride on the trucks, and they expel them across the borders. I mean, these are facts. Yeah. Israeli journalists today write about these facts. Amos Kenan, today well-known essayist and author, really, he writes for what we could consider as the New York Times of Israel, Yedot Achronot. He writes about it. He himself participated in these events, really, where he himself was a member of those groups that participated. At the same time, I mean, whether they fled on their own or they were forced to flee, they should have given the chance to return. And we know that, really, they weren't. Until now, they are refugees, and that's where the PLO takes its power and energy from the refugees of the Palestinians and the refugee camps in Lebanon, Syria, Gaza Strip, the West Bank, and so on and so on. Lord Bernadotte, the United Nations mediator in 1948, he said it will be really insult to humanity, to civilization, if we will be welcoming Jewish immigration to Palestine right now, at the same time deny the indigenous population of Palestine the right to return.
Which has happened. Which has happened.
And we have a similar Harold, we have a similar case today. Nobody talks about it. It is as if it is a fact of cultural reality, political reality. You have 1 million Jews who are threatening today to change the demographic. And
coming from the Soviet Union.
Coming from the Soviet Union.
Into the occupied territories, many of them, in East Jerusalem.
To me, it seems that the West is completely complacent, really. Yeah. I truly believe that the complacency of the West with the Zionist project, with the State of Israel today, should be truly discussed. Should be truly discussed by Western scholars, by Western intelligence about Western people who really would have to understand really the relationship between them and the state of Israel. They have to take a moral responsibility for the victims of their victims, and they are not doing so.
And you were raised in the state of Israel. Your father was one of those who remained, decided to stay, as it were, one of the few there. We could talk about some of the details of what life under the Israeli administration has been like. There have been a lot of difficulties there for you people there, but we'll come back to that. But you're a filmmaker. You've done some filmmaking over your existence. We have a clip that we want to run here of a film that was done, I guess, back before the Intifada really got started back in '86. What'd you call the film? It was called
Nazareth in August.
Nazareth in August. So this is around Nazareth, which is a center of Palestinian population.
Yes. It is a historic town. As you know, Nazareth is a Christian Muslim town. Dates back to the days of Christ. It is a town, basically, we use it as immediate context, actually, to raise a question that are relevant to the bigger picture of relationship between the Palestinian and Israelis vis-a-vis ideology, Zionism, Arab nationalism, the state of Israel. We use Nazareth because we thought it is interesting case to study, really. It is a town in Israel supposed to be equal under the law because the people who live there are citizens of the state of Israel. It's true that they are Palestinian, but we see that the land of that town really was expropriated completely. So you have a big town right now with a historic heritage that basically not more than a ghetto, literally not more than a ghetto where people, Palestinian workers, go to work in Jewish settlements and come back to
okay, and you've got some people here talking, including some human rights some Jewish human rights people that are talking in here and so forth. So why don't we set that film up in the studio, please? We'll run a bit of that. We'll come back. We'll talk some more. We have another clip from another film that you've done a little bit more recently than that. So why don't we run a little piece of that clip, set it up in the studio, and run that tape now. It's again called Nazareth in August. In August. Okay, a little piece of film from the film by our guest Yanni Damianos, Nazareth in August. Let's run that tape now, then, please. Thank you.
When the State of Israel was established in Palestine, 45% of all Arab towns and villages were destroyed by the Israeli army, forcing 800,000 Palestinians into exile. Those who stayed on their land were granted Israeli citizenship and placed under military rule. They were given the right to vote and denied the freedom to organize themselves politically. Today, there are over 600,000 Palestinians living in Israel, making up 18% of the population. 55,000 of them live in Nazareth, the largest Arab city in the state. On the hills surrounding Nazareth, one can see the other Nazareth, a Jewish settlement founded in the mid-1950s.
It is not Nazareth, the city of Nazareth. We are the city of Nazareth. It's called, even the officially, it's called Upper Nazareth. Nazareth Elite, which even the name carries some racism in it, upper, and it's wholly Jewish. Upper Nazareth was built on our own confiscated lands, the lands of Nazareth and the nearby villages, 3 or 4 villages, Raini, Mashhad, Ain Mahil.
Nazareth elite was settled from the reason that, like I said before, it is our country and we have to sit everywhere. And if you want, in the Bible, in the book of Joshua, you can find this place that we were here about 3,000 years ago.
So that was the first confiscations took place in 1954, and then the government began planning to build the new Jewish city. And this was the first plan for what is called the plans for Jewishizing the Galilee. That's to decrease the number of Arabs in Galilee, to confiscate the lands of Arabs, and to build Jewish settlements and towns in the framework of this plan of Jewishizing Galilee.
Well, first of all, Judaization of Galilee, I don't know exactly what do you mean. We are speaking about the development of the Galilee. And we develop it.
I want to add to this something which I think very important. I want to say as a Jew that this was exactly the situation of the Jews in Europe and in other places 200 years ago. The situation of Palestinian citizens of the State of Israel, not West Bank, not Gaza, not Lebanon, citizens of the State of Israel, is, in my opinion, completely or on most points similar to the situation of Jews in European ghettos 200 years ago.
Zionism's colonial project received its legitimation as a part of imperialism's conquest of the Third World. Although the ideology of both Zionism and imperialism expressed a common disregard for the Palestinians, Zionism's vision of the redemption of the land was based on the exclusion of those people. And while the Zionist movement was able to use Western anti-Semitism to its advantage, the Palestinians fell victim to that same racism under both British and Zionist rule. All of the major powers supported the resolution, which granted 56% of the land to the Jewish minority, who owned less than 7% of Mandate Palestine. The War of 1948 nullified the UN plan, as the new state of Israel gained de facto control over 78% of the land. Hundreds of Arab villages were destroyed, forcing 800,000 Palestinians into exile.
1967, June the 5th, war breaks out again between Israel and the Arab states.
In the expansionist post-67 period, Israel's internal contradictions were contained by massive infusions of U.S. aid and the rise of religious chauvinist tendencies. The state became increasingly militarized. The phrase armed ghetto, coined by an Israeli politician, became more and more the official line.
أنه لا يمكن التعايش مع الاحتلال. لا يمكن التعايش مع الاحتلال مش بس مع الجندي المحتل، وإنما حتى مع المحتل لو كان لابس سبيل وحالة قتله حاطط كمان كولونيا، لا يمكن التعايش معه.
in America, I think, has heard again and again about the kibbutzim. Kibbutzim are as apartheid as South Africa. Those more than 90% of the land of State of Israel, and also the lands confiscated in West Bank and Gaza Strip, belong or are administered by the Jewish National Fund for openly and officially racist purposes, meaning only for Jewish benefit. This quotation from their own regulations. And this is the main arm of the apartheid policy of both State of Israel and the World Zionistic Organization. What is happening in Galilee is similar, although milder, to what is happening in West Bank, in Golan. The pattern of colonization, really rather similar to the Wild West, is to form a chain of either settlements or fortified positions like lookouts, which will divide the Palestinian population into small areas, which Sharon used to call squares, each one surrounded by settlements on lookouts, and each one watched by this system of settlements. If you look on the map of South Africa and on the Bantustans, you will see a very similar pattern.
Today, a New York-style salute to Israel, marking the anniversary of the founding of the Jewish state. The day began with a breakfast of bagels, cream cheese, and lox for U.S. and Israeli dignitaries. Most of the talk was about the tradition of friendship that has existed between the two countries.
With some ups and downs along the way, they're getting better all the time.
From an economic standpoint, from a governmental standpoint, the fact that they've built up a nation and defended that nation successfully, I think we have a bond of friendship and recognize that we have similar values and in many ways a similar view of the world.
Yeah, back again. That was really very, very interesting tape. And one of the things that interests me, I've heard some people, I've talked to some people, Balfour, Brickner, others, who had said that by 1947-48 that that they had managed to buy up, as it were, a great deal of that. Your tape said it was only about 6% that they had actually been able to have purchased, and that really what it was then, in your view, and from the Palestinian perspective, was that it was the seizure of the land of Palestinian peoples and ran against this notion that people without a land for a land without people. There were a great number of people there, Palestinian peoples, and they were displaced by this by the force that was represented by the Jewish interest there. How had the Jewish come to be so powerful militarily? They had had their problems with the British and so forth.
Well, first to start with the latter, really, to say that they came to a country without people, it is nonsense. And the second in command in the Zionist movement, early in the early days of the Zionist movement, really, in the early 1900, really, Max Nordau wrote back to Herzl, Theodor Herzl, back in Vienna, telling him, actually, it is shocking. We came to a country that is populated. Every inch of this land is cultivated, really. So to suggest that the land was empty, it is really a test to
even at that time. Right?
Even at that time is really bad attempt, really, to rewrite history, and that should not compliment to those who write it.
So it really was land seizure by military force?
It was land seizure through the years. I would say even the number of those land that were honestly bought, first they weren't bought, the 6%, they weren't bought from the peasants, really. The land at the time belonged to the old order of land ownership, feudal ownership.
Some of it back to Ottoman days, probably, yeah.
Feudal ownership, some of these feudal landlords, really, they were willing to sell their land to the Jewish agency, to Zionist organization, and then the Jewish agency, the Zionist organization, basically at gunpoint were bribing Ottoman, early days, bribing Ottoman officials, really, and forcing the peasants, really, to flee. That was the case under the Ottomans. That was the case under the British. The British, as we said early, basically, realized the value of Jewish presence in Palestine, to cooperate with the British against what would have been, what later on became a mass rebellion of Palestinians against colonialism, mass rebellions of Syrians against colonialism, mass rebellions of Egyptians against colonialism. They trained, basically, the Jewish settlement in Palestine. We know that they had at some point over 20,000 Israeli settlers armed, really, by British, armed and led by British general, actually, intelligence general, Wingate, called Wingate. Those guys really participated in putting down one of the most important Palestinian rebellions in their history, the rebellion of 1936, that lasted 3 years until 1939. Those forces participated alongside the British army, really, to destroy the Palestinian rebellion. So the land, yes, was taken in an unfair way, but the number of that land until 1948 did not exceed 6-7% of the land. The rest of it was seized after the establishment of the State of Israel. The value of the tape, Harold, I mean, we really also, another reason for us focusing on the Palestinian in Israel in this tape, basically, had Israel really wanted to make peace with the Palestinians, it could have made peace with the Palestinians inside Israel, where it had total control over their life. But we know that the State of Israel refused to make peace, refused to acknowledge it as political, as a national minority. You have 600,000 Palestinians, over 600,000 Palestinians inside Israel. They are treated, I would say, not like a second citizen, but like third-class citizens, really.
Like a third-class citizen.
Definitely, because you have the Oriental Jews that come after the European Jews, and then the Palestinians. Their land continue to be expropriated. They face truly
like apartheid. Would you say apartheid is too strong a comparison?
Well, in my view, it is not. We always said, actually, South Africa, I mean, I would even go further to say, maybe to infuriate many people, really, I would say we always said that South Africa has a potential to reform. Israel does not. If Israel to reform, it has to get rid of the ideological, I would say, frame boundaries of that state, which is Zionism, basically. Zionism based in exclusion, really, to exclude the indigenous people from any participation in their project.
We had Ben Gurion, and we had other kinds of, different kinds of people that were Zionists. We'd mentioned earlier, even somebody like Martin Buber or Magnus and so forth had been Zionists in the sense of there being, you know, a humanitarian Zionism. That sort of thing. We also had at that time Jabotinsky, and we had people like Begin, we had people like Shamir, who were very, very hard-line terrorists, really, at the very starting of the Zionist enterprise as far as they saw it there. And like on the emblem of the Likud party, it was always relating now to let's say 1967, which is a watershed year and so forth. They always had on the emblem of their party both sides of the Jordan River. They never had any question of there being their intention was to establish a greater Israel that would have included all of what is the West Bank, Gaza, and maybe even more, was their intention right from the very beginning. Some of these people, these people were in the background through a great deal of the Israeli history when labor was in the ascendancy, Ben-Gurion and Golda Meir and so forth. But they came into the fore in 1977 with Begin, and then also now with Shamir and so forth. Does it make a difference from your perspective whether it is the labor people or the earlier people, or whether it is the hard line or right wing, and even now bringing into the cabinet people who are openly saying those Palestinians of the West Bank should be expelled as a view? Does it make a difference from you historically?
Not only does it make a difference.
And just to underscore, that thing, that idea that in 1967 Israel was responding to an attack, that they were defending themselves, I wonder if you could address yourself to that issue. That's a defining issue for many people, American Jewish people. It's a very defining issue. They felt existentially, as Abba Eban would have said, we were under attack, and then they went ahead and won in only 6 days. It makes one wonder. But I wonder if you could address yourself to that.
Let me start with this question of 1967. The pretext, the reason for the war in 1967 was that basically Egypt closed the waterways of Tehran to prevent the Israeli navigation through these waterways, really. The Egyptian view was then that Israel acquired the right of, that navigation privilege, really, as a result of the 1956 war, which by United Nations resolutions, even by the American side at the time, was a legitimate war and wrong war when Eisenhower actually gave ultimatum to the state of Israel to retreat. And when basically Ben-Gurion in the Knesset said, answering Shamir, basically, when he asked him, why did you retreat from Gaza Strip? He said, well, we couldn't say no to our friend in the White House, Eisenhower, at the time. So Egypt claimed that Israel got something that was not entitled to, which to navigate through the waterways of Tehran, and all what they wanted actually to eliminate basically that privilege that Israel acquired as a result of the 1956 war. We have to remember basically the southern port of Israel, Eilat. There's almost no commercial activity until 1967, actually. 1 or 2 commercial flights a year were actually docking at Eilat seaport, really. So Israel was looking for pretexts. There is a very important book, really, and the Israeli state made sure that it is not translated into English. The memoirs of Moshe Sharet. Moshe Sharet is the prime minister and the foreign minister of Israel in very critical years, really, during the 55, 56, 57, when many of the designs, really, of those expansionist policies were actually put on papers and put forward, really. It speaks, actually, of the Israeli intent and how they basically were formulating their army, building their army to play those expansionist rules. But back to 67, we know Sharon himself, actually, in 1967, when he emerged as a hero of that war, and a politician, he wrote explicitly, don't tell us this is a war that we weren't able to prevent. It is a war we were able to prevent if we really wanted to. We did not want to prevent that war because we needed that war to destroy the Egyptian army from playing any threatening role in the future. But if you look at really the history of wars in the Middle East in the last 45 years, you have a war almost in every 10, 12 years.
Yeah, it's constant and that sort of thing, and people have a different perspective on what it is. And, you know, they think the problem is time. We're running out of time. You have another film, right? You did another film that was called, what again now?
Under Siege, the Palestinians and the American media.
Okay, another siege, another program, the Palestinians Under Siege. We have a little clip from that we want to do. We could go on. This is a big subject. And let's run a little piece of that clip now, and then we'll come back and round this out. And I'm sorry we're running out of time, but we're going to try and get it up to the future. Okay. But let's run that. Let's just run a little clip from that tape. Now, the second film was made in what, 87 or so?
Yes, something like
87
that.
87 or so. Okay, fine. That's coming up now. Thank you. Okay, just...
military base. From orders of the captain, he wanted the base closed off. In all, 19 people were reportedly aboard the plane when it was forced down in Sicily.
They included 5 Egyptian diplomats and 2 officials of a PLO group.
For all the advanced practice on paper, for all the know-how on the spot, it took high-tech and low-down seat-of-the-pants gumption to pick out the plane, force it down, and not have to fire a shot.
Official Washington reflected the mood of the country over the success of the operation, outright elation.
This morning, the American giant stretched out its little finger and exacted a fitting bit of retribution.
Many terrorism specialists believe this mission to Sicily may well spark acts of retaliation against Americans. But at the White House today, there was no second guessing. Said one top official, this is a time of renewal and strengthening for all of us.
We had finally gotten it right. We had evened the score. My president came through, and I'm proud and I show it. You could hear the New York accent in the Daily News headline, "We bagged the bums." You could not hear many dissenting voices in Manhattan today. In Times Square, the sentiment was, it's about time.
It's about time that we did something about it. I really hope these guys get what's coming to them.
We had plucked him out of the sky and dropped him in Sicily. It was an offer they could not refuse.
Stood up and took some type of action.
Here we are taking a little initiative and sticking it back to them.
And the talk you heard in the bars of America today was tough talk.
I think we should get them over here. Everyone they kill of ours, kill 2 of theirs. This eye of an eye and tooth for a tooth.
That line was written in the Middle East. And before they opened
I think that the role of the media in this country, as far as the Middle East is concerned, is one of propagating ignorance. The problem is here. You have people who know nothing doing the editing, doing the selection, in a sense, determining what are the stories and sending to the journalists out there requests, we want you to follow this, we want you to follow that. Now, obviously, there is freedom of the press. That is to say, the journalist, to some extent, writes what he wants. But there are limits to that, and the limits are very constraining in many cases.
Rashid Khalidi is Associate Professor of Middle East Politics at Columbia University. He taught at the American University in Beirut during the 1970s and early 80s. He is also the author of a new book about the 1982 Israeli invasion of Lebanon.
Blacks are fighting over the issue of empowerment and self-determination. By and large, the South African government has failed utterly, with Western public opinion, to put that issue in terms of the very narrow question of what means do these people use to fight oppression. In South Africa, everybody thinks of apartheid and oppression, everybody thinks of resistance, and everybody thinks of the issues of self-determination and empowerment as the only things that count.
Senator Edward Kennedy toured South Africa this month at the invitation of Nobel Peace Laureate Bishop Desmond Tutu.
They wanted to be as a family, husband with their wife.
Kennedy came away dismayed at the continuing massive repression of black South Africans.
They have to dismantle those laws which make people second-class citizens in their own countries. The example, the forced relocation of citizens, uprooting them from land which they've held for generations and relocating them. Denying them an opportunity to live with their families where they work, solely on the basis of race.
Now, if we move to a somewhat different situation, not at the Palestinians, we're talking about empowerment. We have 2.5 million people living in Palestine, Palestinians, and we have 3.5 million Jews, Israeli Jews. The Israeli Jews are all full citizens of the State of Israel. Of the Palestinians, less than 750,000 are citizens of the State of Israel, i.e. citizens of a Jewish state, which just by the very definition of the state, they don't fit that main group. The other 1.5 million, or more than 1.5 million, Palestinians have been living without any rights in a state of limbo under military occupation since 1967. Okay? The other 2 million Palestinians have been living in exile from their homeland in the Palestinian diaspora. Prima facie, this is an issue of empowerment and self-determination. These are people who proclaim themselves to be a people, want to return to their homeland, and want to reconstitute themselves as a state or constitute themselves for the first time as a state. And they claim alongside Israel. There's an issue of oppression, repression in the occupied territories at the very least. And there's an issue of resistance, and then the issue of the means used to resist.
Okay, back again now with Yanni, and that was interesting. I'm sorry we're running short of time. In general, then, I think the point you can make from a Palestinian perspective is that there has been an aggression exerted against the Palestinian people, that there's been an expansionist policy that has been part of the Israeli position, that this question and the plight of the Palestinian people is one that really must be addressed, and one that has been overlooked by a Eurocentric, colonialist a world which has tended to dominate international politics and so forth, and the plight of the Palestinian people and what has been done to them in the name of this Zionist expansionist movement is something that is something that we must call world attention to. Right?
Correct.
To put it mildly.
Correct. I truly believe. Again, I like to bring the ball back to Western culture. Really, I truly believe they should be held responsible for the miseries and the destruction of Palestinian heritage, and they should be responsible to actually help the Palestinian achieve their national independence, especially when you have many United Nations resolutions are speaking really on behalf of the Palestinians. The West in general was responsible for the Holocaust. The West in general sponsored the state of Israel, which was a product of the Holocaust. The West continues, specifically the USA, continues actually to embrace that state, whether they are wrong or right. It is absolutely imperative for us to recognize that the Palestinians are not merely an abstract figure in Middle Eastern or global equations. They are a nation with a home, with a land, with a culture, and they have a flag. They should be given the chance to be able to build and cultivate their own culture and participate in the human civilization development, really. And in my view, the Palestinians, as well as the Arabs, reach the point where are willing, they are begging basically for negotiation with the state of Israel. They are being rejected by the state of Israel.
It has been rejected certainly since National Congress meeting in '88 and so forth. It was rejected, and it reflects the fact. And again, this right-wing government and the inclusion within the current government of people who are openly advocating what had been Mark Kahana's position, which had thought to be so unthinkable for so long, the idea of the expulsion and the establishment of by military force, and saying we have won. We really will do what we want. That sort of intransigent sort of attitude seems to be gaining ground as far as the body politic and this sort of arrogant Western-oriented, as you say, with the support, the unending support of the United States of this Western, as you see it, intrusion into the Arab world. And this is a flashpoint as far as the broader Arab world is concerned. It's not only the Palestinian people, it's the whole broader Arab world that ultimately is focusing on this particular issue.
My feeling that was the case really during the years, whether it's under Labour, under Peres, or Ben Gurion, or Rabin, and it is the same really under Shamir, and it was the same under Begin. The difference really is these guys less apologetic to what they do really. There is a clear fascization of political life in Israel, and they do not have to apologize to the West. They do not have to apologize to themselves. They say, they do what they say, and they don't have to actually cover it under pretexts of, okay, the Arabs don't want us. Basically, Shamir, a couple of months ago, gave an interview, and he said it explicitly. We are against the PLO, not because the PLO is a terrorist. He knows himself is a terrorist, was a terrorist, really. No, but because the PLO represents Palestinian national aspiration. And this is really the point. They are unwilling to share that land with the indigenous people who really lived there.
Yeah, they want it all for themselves.
Centuries. And in my view, that is a sad fact. That is a sad fact that, in my view, Israel is suffering from it, will continue to suffer from it, and Israel will never recover its soul. And actually making new inroads into the future if it does not help to resolve genuinely the Palestinian question by helping the Palestinians actually to attain their own state. Really, it's very funny reality. Before the uprising, before the Intifada, we know the Intifada continued. In my view, the Intifada never stopped in the last 70 years. It gains momentum. The oppression puts it down, but once again, it starts. Israel had a chance, I truly believe, in 1986, 87, Israel had a chance to reform itself. I mean, at least the facts in the field were showing that if Israel wants to become an economic player, yes, Israel has to solve the Palestinian question, and there is a wide market in the Middle East. With Arab countries, they could actually build their own economic as well as cultural entity, but Israel works intentionally, consciously against that process. As I said, any attempt to open that state to the Arab world, at least the Zionists, and the state is a Zionist, they perceive it as a threat to the hegemony of that ideology over the Israeli people. So they would like to continue that policy. The keys are here, really. The keys are in the West. Israel cannot survive a single day, and this is not exaggeration, really, without the moral, the political, the economic, the military support of the colonial powers. And today, the USA is the primary, we know, the primary superpower.
Particularly the United States, which has backed it so
particularly
so.
The USA, really. Without that, if the USA decides today, really, that the time has come to look at the Middle East through fresh eyes, really, through fresh, new set of politics, and we really do not need to use the Palestine or the Middle East as a component in kind of continuing a Cold War or preserve it until they start a new Cold War, who knows against who, then the Palestinian question will be resolved. There are United Nations resolutions, the Palestinians are willing, the PLO made it more than once clear that they are willing to, they actually recognize Israel. I mean, the victim recognizes victimizer. It's absolutely phenomenal. And we still insist, here in the West, there is one fact, simple fact, really. We are the terrorists. At least we are viewed here by Israel and the West. The Palestinians are the terrorists. Cynical fact. The number of Jewish casualties in Palestine in 100 years of Palestinian struggle did not exceed 2,000 casualties, really. While the Palestinian, there is no single Palestinian that did not lose either property or member of his family. They lost the whole country. They live in misery in refugee camps, really. They are struggling. They aim, really, to eliminate the legacy of Israeli occupation, and the West is still complacent. The keys are here in the West, and I myself hold the West and the U.S. responsible, really, for the miseries of the Palestinians.
Okay, we'll help you. Thanks for helping to put this sort of straight. Your position, as it were, in a certain sense, helped to share that with you, and thanks for coming in.
Thank you for having me.
Been your pleasure to have the perceptions of Yanni Damiano. He's a freelance filmmaker and a journalist, Palestinian. Happy to have been able to present some of his perceptions and filmic expression, and we invite you on Conversations. Tune in again next week. We'll be coming back next week. That's it for this particular program. Once again, Yanni, thank you very much. Thank you very much for viewing. Good night. We'll see you next week.
War now by stones. That is only our believing, our bodies, and the stones. There is no way. We have no other choice. And because of this, the Palestinian people will continue doing this. Even if the Israeli tanks surrounding and closing all the villages and the refugees camps and the main cities in the West Bank, people will continue in this way until they have their own rights to have their own state.